The morning they threw us out, the sky was the color of ash. Not the dramatic, stormy gray of movies where the hero walks into the rain with purpose and a soundtrack. Just flat, colorless, indifferent sky, the kind of sky that doesn't care what happens beneath it. The kind of sky that has seen too many people standing on doorsteps holding everything they own in a single bag, and has long since stopped being surprised. I was 15 years old. My sister Nora was 12. Our stepmother Diane didn't scream. That surprised me, even then. I had braced for the screaming, for the dramatic finale that would at least have the dignity of passion. Instead, she simply opened the front door, set our 2 backpacks on the concrete step, and looked at us with an expression so flat and final it was worse than any rage could have been. "Your father agrees," she said, as if she were telling us about a change in dinner plans. "You two have been nothing but disruption since the day you arrived. We're starting fresh. You need to figure out your own arrangements." Behind her, somewhere deeper in the house, I could hear the television. My father was watching the television while his 2 children were being removed from his life like furniture he'd grown tired of. I kept waiting for him to appear in the hallway, to say something, to remember that he was our father. The door closed, the lock clicked. Nora's hand found mine. She didn't cry right away. She was 12, and she was tougher than anyone gave her credit for. She just looked at the door for a long moment, then looked up at me. Her eyes were steady in the way that a child's eyes get when they've learned that falling apart is a luxury they can't afford. "Remy," she said quietly, "what do we do?" I was 15. I had $43 in my pocket, a backpack with 3 days of clothes, and approximately no idea what we were going to do. But she was looking at me the way she always looked at me, with a complete, unshakable belief that I would figure it out. And that look was the only thing standing between me and total panic. "We go to Grandma Celia's place," I said. The words came out before I'd finished thinking them, but once they were in the air, they felt true. They felt like the only thing that made sense. The problem was that Grandma Celia had been dead for 8 months. Our grandmother had lived 40 minutes outside of town, on a piece of land nobody wanted. 3 acres of clay-heavy soil and second-growth forest at the end of a gravel road that the county had never bothered to pave. The house was small and old, a 2-bedroom farmhouse that had been built in the 1940s and maintained with the stubbornness of a woman who refused to ask for help and refused to leave. Our mother had grown up there. She had died when I was 11 and Nora was 8. A fact that still lived in my chest like a splinter too deep to remove. After our mother died, our father remarried. After he remarried, Grandma Celia became a presence we visited on holidays, and then less than that. She had a way of looking at Diane that made Diane deeply uncomfortable, and Diane had a way of controlling our access to anyone who made her uncomfortable. When Grandma Celia died, she left the property to me and Nora. That was what the lawyer's letter had said, the one Diane had read aloud at the kitchen table with an expression like she was tasting something sour. "The old woman left the land to the children," she'd said to our father. "Not to you, to them." Typical. I had filed the letter away in my memory as information that didn't yet apply to me. I was 15. Property was an adult concept. I didn't understand yet that it was the most important thing I had ever been given. I didn't understand it until the morning we were standing on a concrete step with nowhere to go. Then I understood it completely. The bus to Haldwell took 45 minutes and cost $3 each. Nora sat beside me with her backpack on her lap and her chin up, watching the suburbs dissolve into scrubland and then into the low, rolling farmland that surrounded our grandmother's town. Neither of us spoke much. There wasn't much to say. We were doing the thing, and the thing required focus. We got off at the Haldwell crossroads and walked the remaining 2 miles to the property. The gravel road crunched under our shoes. The October air smelled of fallen leaves and distant wood smoke and something else. Something loamy and cold and old that I always associated with this particular piece of land. Then we saw the house. It was worse than I had expected. 8 months of emptiness had not been kind. The porch railing had collapsed on the left side. One of the front windows had cracked, and a piece of cardboard had been wedged into the gap from the inside. Probably Grandma Celia's last patch job before she got too sick to manage it. The paint, which had once been white, had faded to the color of old teeth. The yard was overtaken by goldenrod and thistle, waist-high in places. Nora looked at it for a long moment. Then she said, in the careful voice of someone choosing their words precisely, "It needs some work." "Yeah," I said, "it does. But it's ours." "But it's ours." She nodded, like that settled it, and walked up the path toward the front door. I had found the house key on the same ring as our grandmother's spare car key, which she had given to our mother years before and which our mother had kept in her jewelry box, which I had kept hidden from Diane in the lining of my backpack since the day I understood that Diane went through our things when we weren't looking. The key still worked. The lock was stiff, resistant, but it turned. The door swung open into a dark interior that smelled of dust and old wood and, faintly, of our grandmother. Lavender and coffee and something indefinably her. We stepped inside. The first 2 days were hard in the way that only those particular days can be hard. The days when you are absorbing the reality of a situation that your mind keeps trying to reject. We swept. We opened windows to air out the mustiness. We found that the electricity had been shut off, that the water still ran cold and brown before clearing, that the wood stove in the kitchen was functional if temperamental, and that there was exactly 1 can of soup in the pantry. We ate the soup cold because we hadn't figured out the wood stove yet. Nora said it was fine. I knew it wasn't fine, but I appreciated her saying so. On the second night, unable to sleep on the bare mattress in our grandmother's room, I went downstairs and sat at the kitchen table by the light of my phone. I was trying to take inventory, trying to understand what we had and what we needed and how long the $40 I had left would last us. That's when I noticed the journal. It was sitting on the shelf beside the kitchen window, between a mason jar of dried herbs and an old almanac. It was small, leather-covered, with our grandmother's handwriting on the spine in black marker. Property and Provisions, Celia Marsh. I took it down and opened it. It was not a diary. It was something more practical than that, a record. Our grandmother had been a meticulous keeper of records. The journal documented the property in detail, the boundaries, the soil conditions in different sections, the varieties of plants she had cultivated, the repairs she had made each year, and, in the final section, a series of entries written in a shakier hand than the rest. The final entry was dated 6 weeks before she died. I have written to Remy. I don't know if the letter will reach him. Diane controls what comes into that house, and I don't trust her. But I need him to know about the cellar. If anything happens to me and those children end up without proper shelter, the cellar will be what saves them. It is stocked. It is sound. It is built to last. They just have to find it. I tried to build it the way my own grandmother built her root cellar. The way people built things when they built them to outlast themselves. The entrance is behind the big black walnut at the north end of the property. I covered the doors with sod so they'd stay hidden. I was maybe too careful. Remy is a smart boy. He'll find it. I read this 3 times. My phone flashlight was getting dim. I set the journal on the table and sat with my hands flat on the wood and breathed in the dark kitchen of my dead grandmother's house. She had known. She had known we might end up here. She had known we might end up with nothing. And she had spent some part of her last months building something for us. I went upstairs and woke Nora. The north end of the property was a 5-minute walk through overgrown grass and a stand of young poplars that had grown up since the last time anyone had paid attention to the land. The black walnut was enormous, older than the house, older probably than any human plan that had ever been made on this land. Its roots had buckled the earth around it into a series of dark ridges, and the ground beneath its canopy was bare of grass. Walnut trees have that property, poisoning the soil around themselves so nothing else competes with them. Nora found it before I did. Remy. Her voice was careful and controlled, the way her voice got when she was trying not to show how excited she was. Come here. She was standing at the base of the walnut, pointing down at the ground. I followed her finger. At first I saw nothing. Then my eyes adjusted and I saw what she was seeing. A slight rectangular depression in the earth, covered in a mat of dead sod that hadn't quite knitted back into the surrounding ground. At the far edge of the rectangle, barely visible beneath a thick curtain of dead goldenrod, was the edge of what looked like a wooden frame. We pulled the goldenrod away with our hands. Underneath was a pair of heavy wooden doors set at a shallow angle into the ground. They were old, the wood was weathered and dark, but they were solid. Iron strap hinges, a thick iron hasp with a padlock. The padlock was open. The shackle was hanging in the hasp but not locked through it. She had left it unlocked. She had left it open for us. I looked at Nora. She looked at me. I pulled the padlock free, lifted the hasp, and grabbed the iron handle of the right-hand door. It was heavy, heavy enough that I had to brace my feet and pull with my whole body, but it came up. First an inch, then more. A billow of cool, dark air rushing up out of the opening, carrying a smell of earth and dried herbs and dry wood. We shone our phone lights down into the darkness. Wooden steps led down at a gentle angle, 8 steps, into a low, broad space that my light was not quite strong enough to fill, but I could see enough. I could see shelves. I could see jars. I could see the shapes of things carefully arranged, carefully stored. Nora grabbed my arm. She didn't say anything. She didn't need to. We went down. Our grandmother's root cellar was not a dramatic space. It was not a bunker or a sanctuary in any cinematic sense. It was exactly what it claimed to be, a root cellar, a practical space dug into the earth for the practical purpose of keeping things cold and dry and preserved. But in that moment, with a dead phone battery and a sister who hadn't eaten a real meal in 2 days and no plan for the following morning, it was the most beautiful thing I had ever seen. The shelves lined 3 walls, floor to ceiling. They were loaded. Canned goods, hundreds of jars of our grandmother's preserves, the lids sealed with her characteristic wax-topped cloth and labeled in her handwriting. Green beans, tomatoes, applesauce, pickled beets, corn, peaches, soup stock, jams. On the lower shelves were mesh bags of potatoes and onions, strings of dried garlic, bundles of dried herbs hanging from the ceiling joists. On one side, a wooden box was filled with apples wrapped individually in newspaper. They were still firm, still fragrant. In the center of the room, a small wooden table. On the table, a kerosene lantern, a box of matches, and a sealed envelope with one word on the front. Remy, my name, in her handwriting, in the steadiest version of her hand. The version she used when she wanted something to last. I lit the lantern first. Its warm light filled the cellar, and the shadows it cast on all those shelves of preserved food made the place look like a painting, like something old and deliberate and made with love. Then I sat down on the small stool that was tucked under the table, and I opened the letter. Nora sat cross-legged on the earthen floor and hugged her backpack and listened while I read. Remy, if you found this, then I was right to leave it. I am sorry I couldn't tell you about it in person. You know as well as I do that Diane reads things that don't belong to her, and I couldn't risk her finding out about this place before you could get to it. I am also sorry that whatever happened to bring you here was painful. I have been carrying the worry of you and Nora for a long time. Your mother made me promise to watch over you both, and I tried. I tried within the limits of what your father would allow. I failed in more ways than I succeeded, and I will carry that to my grave. This cellar took me 3 years to build. I started it the summer after your mother died, When I began to understand that your father's new wife was not going to be kind to her children. I am not a woman who panics, I am a woman who makes plans. This is my plan for you. The food on these shelves will keep you through a winter if you are careful with it. I have written a list on the back of this letter of what is there, approximately, and notes on how long each item will last. The potatoes and apples will go first. The canned goods will last for years. The property is yours, I have seen to that. A man named Harlan at the county clerk's office has a copy of the deed and instructions. Go see him and tell him your name. Now I need to tell you something important, Remy. Something I did not write down anywhere else, because I didn't want it written down. There is water on this property. Not just the surface well, underground. About 30 feet below the north field, there is a shelf of porous limestone, and under that limestone is a reservoir. I had it surveyed 5 years ago by a man named Dale Pritchett, who is now retired in Florida. The survey says the reservoir is large, larger than anything of its kind in this county. I have received 3 offers for this land in the past 2 years. All 3 came from a company called Meridian Water Holdings. They didn't say they were from Meridian. They used different names, different representatives, but I looked into them, and they all came back to the same place. Meridian wants the water. They want to sink industrial wells, bottle it, and sell it. If they get this land, they will drain that reservoir. They will take what took thousands of years to fill and empty it for profit. The people in Haldwell, who depend on the county's water table, will feel it within 10 years. Maybe sooner. I turned them down 3 times. They raised their offers each time. The last offer was substantial enough that I won't write the number here because I don't want that number inside your head before you've had a chance to form your own thinking. Here is what I want to tell you, and then I'll leave you alone with your choice. This land fed your great-grandmother through the Depression. It fed your grandmother through 2 recessions and a widowhood. It fed your mother's childhood. It will feed you and Nora if you let it. It is not rich land. It is not easy land. But it is alive, and it is honest, and it has never taken more than it gave. You can sell it. You can take Meridian's money and go somewhere else and build a different life. I would not judge you for it. You have been through enough that no one could judge you for choosing the easier road. But I want you to consider what it means to have a place in the world, a real place. Not an apartment, not a rental, not a house that someone else can tell you to leave. A place that is yours, that is rooted, that you can point to and say, here, I am from here. This is mine. That kind of belonging is rarer than water. And you have it. Whatever you decide, I love you. I am proud of who you are becoming. Take care of your sister. She is tougher than she looks, but she needs you. All my love, Grandma Celia. I read the letter twice. The second time, Nora moved around the table and read it over my shoulder. When I finished, she was quiet for a while. She knew, Nora said. Yeah, she built all this for us. I looked around the cellar. The hundreds of jars, the dried herbs, the apples in their newspaper wrappers. 3 years of work, done in secret, done on faith that we would someday need it. The love that takes the form of practical action, of preparation, of building something solid because you know that words and sentiment are not enough. Yeah, I said again. My voice wasn't entirely steady. So what do we do? The question hung in the lantern light. In my head I could feel the weight of Meridian's offer, the undisclosed number, whatever it was, pressing against the knowledge of everything I was looking at. A way out, a clean start, money enough to rent an apartment, to put Nora in a real school, to stop worrying about tomorrow. And then I looked at my sister's face. She was 12 years old, sitting on the earthen floor of a root cellar her dead grandmother had built for her, surrounded by the evidence of a love that had taken years to construct in silence. She was looking at me with that look, the one that said she believed in me, not in the money, Not in the easy road, in me. We stay, I said. The first person in town to hear about us was George Hallett. George ran the feed store on Main Street, and he had known our grandmother for 30 years. He came to find us on our third morning at the property, after someone in town had spotted us walking down the county road carrying firewood. He drove his truck up the gravel lane, parked, and stood in our yard looking at the state of the house with the careful, assessing eye of a man who has seen many properties decline. "You're Celia's grandchildren," he said. "Yes, sir." He looked at me, then at Nora, then back at the house. "Where are your people?" "We don't have any," I said, "just us." He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "You know how to run a wood stove?" "No." "Come on then." He spent 2 hours showing me how to work the stove in the kitchen, how to build a fire that would sustain itself, how to regulate the damper, how to bank it at night so you didn't wake up to a cold house. He didn't ask many questions. He didn't offer opinions about our situation. He just showed me the thing, made me demonstrate it back to him, and when he was satisfied that I had it, he went to his truck and came back with a paper bag, cornmeal, dried beans, some salt pork, he said, setting it on the kitchen table. "Not charity. It's what Celia would have wanted me to bring. She was a good woman. You've got good blood." He left without ceremony, which I was grateful for. I didn't want ceremony. I wanted to not cry in front of Nora. The weeks that followed had a quality of compression to them, like every day contained twice as many things as it should have. We were learning, both of us, at a rate that peacetime living would never have demanded. I learned to build a fire that lasted through the night. I learned which of Grandma Celia's canned goods were best eaten slowly and which could be consumed freely. I learned to read the property journal like a text, using her notes to understand which parts of the land had potential and which were spent. Nora learned everything I learned and then kept going on her own. She had always been the observant one, the one who noticed small things. She found the herb garden under its overgrowth. She mapped the property's 3 water sources, the dug well near the house, the shallow seasonal creek at the south edge, and the spring-fed seep in the north field that our grandmother had mentioned in her journal. She documented them in her school notebook with a thoroughness that would have impressed a professional. In town, the reaction to us was complicated. There were the people like George, the quiet, practical ones who had known our grandmother and who simply absorbed our presence into the fabric of things without comment. An older woman named Mrs. Tuck, who had lived across the county road from the property for 40 years, left a pot of soup on the porch one morning without explanation. A man named Breyer, who did odd jobs around the county, stopped his truck on the road one day to tell me that the porch railing was going to come down on someone's head if I didn't fix it, and then told me exactly how to fix it. But there were others. The Haldwell Courier ran a small piece. Someone had talked, someone always talks, about 2 unaccompanied minors living alone on the old marsh property. The piece was written with a kind of delicate pity that made my face burn. The comments on the online version were worse. I read them once and then didn't read them again. In the hardware store, one Saturday, I overheard 2 men talking while I waited at the counter. They didn't know I was Celia Marsh's grandson. Or maybe they didn't care. "Those 2 kids out at the Marsh place," one of them said. "They don't know what they're in for. First real winter up there, they'll be running back to wherever they came from." The other man laughed. "If they make it through October, that house hasn't had proper insulation since Celia's husband was alive." I paid for my nails and my caulk and my weather stripping, and I walked back to the property, and I did not say a single word about what I'd heard. Instead, I went home and I looked up how to properly insulate a wall. The Meridian representative came in November. He was a man named Dennis Walsh, and he arrived in a silver sedan that had no business on our gravel lane. He was in his 40s, aggressively pleasant, with the practiced friendliness of someone who gets paid to persuade people. He stood in our yard with his card already extended before I'd got into the door. Remy Marsh, he said. I'm with Whitmore Land Partners. We represent a consortium interested in acquiring undeveloped properties in this county. We've been in contact with the estate regarding Whitmore Land Partners, I said. That's Meridian Water Holdings. Something shifted in his face, a brief recalibration. He smiled again, undamaged. We're a subsidiary, yes. You've done your homework. That's impressive. What do you want? He shifted his pitch seamlessly, dropping the middleman pretense. He was direct, he said. He respected directness. He understood that my grandmother had declined previous offers, but that was before the property had 2 minors on it without clear legal guardianship, without a stable income, without the resources to maintain even basic habitability. He understood the county had concerns about the welfare situation. He was offering a solution. He said a number. It was a large number, a number that could have meant apartments and schools and something approaching normal. I felt it land in my chest the way large numbers do. Not like joy, but like relief's shadow, the seductive warmth of not having to fight anymore. Behind me, in the doorway, I heard Nora's quiet breathing. I'll need to think about it, I said. Walsh smiled like he'd heard that before and knew what it meant. Of course, take all the time you need. He left his card. He left, at a careful speed that managed to imply both confidence and pressure. I stood in the yard until his car had disappeared down the gravel lane. The November air was cold enough to see my breath. The property spread out around me. The overgrown north field, the black walnut tree at its edge, the slant of the cellar doors barely visible in the long grass. Somewhere down there, 3 years of our grandmother's work was waiting. Ready. Sufficient. I went inside. December brought 3 things. The first real cold, the social worker's visit, and the decision. The social worker's name was Caroline Fisk, and she was sent by the county following a formal complaint filed by, and I only found this out later, through our lawyer, by Diane, our stepmother, who had apparently calculated that if the county took us into foster care, the property would go into a legal gray area that might be easier for Meridian to acquire. The precise cruelty of this took my breath away when I understood it, but in the moment of Caroline Fisk's visit, I only knew that a stranger with a clipboard was standing in our kitchen assessing the situation. The kitchen was warm, the stove was burning properly, the table was set for lunch, the shelves were organized. Nora had made the beds that morning and swept the floors, because Nora had an instinct for what things were supposed to look like that I envied. Caroline Fisk walked through the house with her clipboard and her carefully neutral expression. She looked at the firewood stacked on the porch. She looked at the patched window. She looked at the cellar, which I showed her with deliberate calm, opening the doors and leading her down the steps into the organized, well-stocked space that our grandmother had built. She stood at the bottom of the steps looking at the shelves for a long moment without speaking. "Your grandmother built this," she said. "Yes, she left it for us. She planned ahead," she made a note on her clipboard. "And you've been managing the property yourselves, both of you." "Yes." She looked at Nora, who was standing straight-backed at the top of the steps with her arms folded, watching the social worker with the steadiness of someone who has decided not to show fear. "What do you need?" Caroline Fisk asked me. Not in a testing way, in an honest way. "A lawyer," I said, "to make the guardianship formal, and someone to sign off on us staying here." She looked at me for a long moment. Then she made another note. "I know a lawyer," she said. Her name was Patricia Duval, and she was a small, quick-moving woman who operated out of an office above the Haldwell Pharmacy and who had, according to George at the feed store, never lost a property case in 20 years of practice. She reviewed our situation with the swift comprehension of someone who has seen every variation of a particular problem. "The deed is solid," she told me. "Your grandmother had it correctly transferred. Meridian has been fishing in this county for 3 years, and they know the legal terrain. They'll try the minor without guardian angle if they can. So we need to resolve the guardianship." She contacted the county. She filed the paperwork. She was the bulldog we needed in a room where we hadn't known anyone was fighting. She also sent a letter to Dennis Walsh at Whitmore Land Partners/Meridian Water Holdings that was, she told me, the legal equivalent of a door closing firmly in someone's face. While the legal process moved forward, we moved forward too. I had found work, 3 days a week at the feed store with George, who paid me in cash and occasionally in kind, adding bags of cornmeal or oats to my weekly earnings without mentioning he was doing it. It wasn't enough to live on in any conventional sense, but combined with the Cellar's provisions, it was enough to function. Nora had started attending the county middle school, a 20-minute bus ride each way. She went with the same contained intensity she brought to everything, making exactly 2 friends in the first month. Both of them, she reported, also considered strange by the social standards of 12-year-olds, which suited her fine. And I had begun to understand the property in a way I hadn't when we first arrived. The journal was a guide, but the land itself was the teacher. I walked it every morning before the school bus came, in all weathers, learning where it drained and where it held water, where the soil was heavy and where it was light, where Grandma Celia had grown things and where she'd let things grow themselves. The north field, where the underground reservoir sat beneath its limestone shelf, was the richest part of the property. Even untended, even overgrown, it had a quality of aliveness to it, a greenness in season that the rest of the land didn't quite match. I thought about what Meridian wanted to do to it. I thought about the industrial wells, the bottling operation, the emptying of something that had taken geological time to fill, and I thought about what my grandmother had said. It has never taken more than it gave. I was forming a different idea. January was the coldest month anyone in Haldwell could remember in a decade. The temperature dropped to single digits and stayed there for 3 weeks. Pipes burst in a third of the houses in town. The county road to our property iced over so thoroughly that no vehicle could travel it for 5 days. The hardware store sold out of pipe heat tape. The diner closed for 2 days when their water system failed. We were fine. The root cellar held a constant 52 degrees regardless of the outside temperature, the earthen insulation doing exactly what earthen insulation has always done. The wood stove heated the house. We had enough food because we had always had enough food, because our grandmother had made sure of it. The men from the hardware store, the men who had said we wouldn't survive the winter, lived in town in houses with forced air heating and frozen pipes. We lived on a piece of land that had been prepared for exactly this. We had been mocked for being the kids in the old house at the end of the unpaved road, and then the winter came, and we were the ones who were warm and fed and unworried. George called us on day 4 of the road closure to check if we were all right. I told him we were fine. "You've got food?" he said. "Heat?" "We've got plenty of both." There was a pause. "Your grandmother," he said, "was something else. I know. She used to come in the store and buy supplies. Winter stores, she called them. I always thought she was overdoing it." Another pause. "I was wrong about that." The legal guardianship was formalized in February. Patricia Duval called me on a Thursday morning while I was in the cellar doing inventory. A weekly habit I'd developed, checking levels, rotating stock, making notes in the property journal the way our grandmother had. My phone signal was weak down there, and I had to come up the steps and stand in the cold field to hear her properly. "The judge signed it this morning," she said. "You have legal guardianship of Nora. The property title is formally recorded in both your names. Meridian filed a water rights inquiry with the county last month, and I've responded. They're not getting anything without a fight they're not prepared for." I stood in the north field in the February cold, the dormant grass stiff with frost around my boots, the black walnut tree bare and enormous against the white sky. Somewhere 30 feet below me, a limestone shelf held an aquifer that a corporation wanted to drain. Above me, the cellar doors were visible in the hillside. Our grandmother's work, our foundation. "Thank you," I said. Don't thank me yet. Meridian is patient and they're well funded. This will take time. That's okay, I said. We have time. Spring came the way it always comes. Not all at once, but in arguments. Cold mornings losing ground to warm afternoons, then reclaiming them, then losing again. The goldenrod and thistle came back in the yard, but this time I had plans for the yard. Nora had plans for the yard. We had spent the winter making plans. The north field, the rich field above the reservoir, became our first cultivation. We started small. A half-acre of vegetables, laid out in the careful way Grandma Celia's journal described, with attention to drainage and sun and what the heavy clay soil could support. Potatoes, because potatoes forgive more than most crops. Beans, squash, a row of the particular variety of winter tomato our grandmother had grown, her seed still viable in the sealed envelopes we found on the cellar shelf. We were not farmers. We made mistakes that any farmer would have seen coming. We planted a row in soil that turned out to be too compacted and had to replant it. We overwatered the beans in a wet June and lost half of them to root rot. Nora's first attempt at staking the tomatoes resulted in a tangle that took us an afternoon to sort out. But the things that grew well. There was something in that soil, some quality of moisture from the reservoir below, some richness that the untended years had not depleted, that made the plants that took hold grow with a vigor I hadn't expected. The potatoes were the best I had ever tasted. The tomatoes, when they finally came in August, were the kind of tomatoes that remind you what tomatoes are supposed to taste like. George tried one at the store. He stood there for a moment, chewing, and then he said, "Celia used to grow tomatoes like this." "I know," I said. "Her seeds." He bought 2 pounds. He introduced me to the owner of the one restaurant in town that was worth mentioning, a woman named Helen who ran a small place that sourced local ingredients when she could get them. Helen tried the tomatoes, then she asked what else we were growing, then she asked if we could supply her regularly. It wasn't a living yet, but it was the beginning of a living. It was evidence that the land could sustain us in something more than survival. It was the first sign that the thing I had been slowly imagining through the winter months might be possible. I called Patricia Duval in September, near the end of our first full year on the property. "I want to file for a water conservation designation on the Northfield Aquifer," I said, "and I want to understand what our options are for agricultural use in the spring." There was a pause. "You've been thinking about this all winter. Tell me what you're thinking." I told her. The reservoir, the quality of the water, the richness of the soil it fed, the fact that the same qualities Meridian wanted to industrialize could be used, more modestly but more sustainably, to grow high-value crops that needed exactly this kind of pure, consistent, cold water source. There were markets for this, I had learned. Specialty crops, watercress, certain varieties of medicinal herbs, the specific cold water mushrooms that grew on logs in the humid air near a natural spring. Not industrial quantities. Enough to make the land feed us the way it had always fed the people who lived on it, the way Grandma Celia had intended it to feed us. A conservation designation would make it significantly harder for Meridian to argue water rights, Patricia said. "It's a good move legally." "It's also just true," I said. "The aquifer is worth conserving." "I know. I've known that since your grandmother first asked me about this land 5 years ago. I hadn't known she knew our grandmother." I sat with that for a moment, the network of connection, the way this place had roots that went further back than I could see. "She asked you about it. She asked me what her options were to protect it." Patricia's voice was quiet, deliberate. "I told her a conservation easement was her strongest tool, but that it would reduce the property's sale value significantly, which would affect what she could leave you. She said that was fine. She said she didn't want to leave you money. She wanted to leave you something worth keeping." 2 years on the property. Nora is in the 8th grade. She has 3 friends now and a vegetable garden that takes up a third of the south yard, and a notebook full of observations about the Northfield soil that are more detailed and more thoughtful than anything I could have produced. The cellar is still the heart of everything. We keep it stocked the way our grandmother kept it. Full going into winter, depleted through the cold months, restocked from the summer's cultivation and preservation. It is the rhythm of the place. It is the rhythm that has kept people alive on this land for generations, and it will keep keeping people alive. The conservation easement is filed. Meridian has not come back, though Patricia tells me they haven't gone away. They are waiting, the way corporations wait, for circumstances to change. She tells me our best protection is permanence. Staying, building, becoming so rooted in the landscape and the community that any legal attack on the land becomes an attack on something the county would have to recognize and reckon with. We are becoming permanent. It is slow, and sometimes it is hard. And there are evenings when I sit in the cellar with the lantern and my grandmother's journal and the particular silence of underground space, and I feel the weight of everything we're carrying. The guardianship, the legal fight we might still have to face, the work that has no end because land always needs tending, always needs attention, never simply stays fixed and finished. But then I think about the men in the hardware store. I think about that flat, indifferent sky the morning we were put out on the step. I think about what the word home used to mean to me, a place someone else owned, a place someone else could revoke, and what it means now. Now it means the creak of these cellar steps under my boots. It means the smell of dried herbs and earth and wood. It means the winter that came, the coldest in 10 years, and we were warm. It means my sister's garden and my grandmother's seeds and a letter written by a dying woman to a grandson she was afraid she'd never see again, full of practical information and absolute love. They mocked us. They said we wouldn't last. The first winter came, and we were fine. The second winter is coming, and we will be fine. And somewhere beneath the Northfield, under 30 feet of earth and limestone, the water that has been there for 10,000 years is still there. Patient, unhurried, taking nothing it didn't need, giving steadily. Our grandmother understood something about this land that Meridian will never understand, something that no amount of money can purchase or extract or put into a plastic bottle and sell, that a place is not just what it contains. A place is what it has made of the people who lived on it, and what those people in turn made of themselves. This place made us. It made us through our grandmother's hands and through the hard, ordinary, irreplaceable work of staying, of choosing, day after day, the harder right over the easier leaving. We are not done. We will not be done for a long time. But we are here. We are from here. And that, more than the water, more than the crops, more than any number Meridian ever wrote on glossy paper, is the thing they cannot take. The second winter arrived without apology. The first snow came in early November, a week before I had expected it, which taught me something important about land and weather that no journal entry can fully prepare you for. The property has its own calendar. It does not consult the almanac. It does not wait for your schedule. It simply moves, and you learn to move with it, or you find yourself behind. We were not behind. Not quite. The firewood was stacked under the porch overhang, 8 cords of it, more than our first winter, because I had learned from our first winter. The cellar was full. The garden had been put to bed in October, the beds mulched with straw, the root vegetables pulled and stored, the last of the tomatoes processed into the jars that now lined the cellar shelves in their satisfying dark red rows. The new insulation I had blown into the attic in September was doing its work. The house held heat differently now. Not perfectly, not the way a modern house holds heat, but steadily, the way old things hold what they've been given. When the snow came, we were ready for it. But something else came with the snow that second November. Something I had not prepared for because I hadn't known to prepare for it. The family from town. Their name was Delacroix. A mother named Simone, a father named Walter, and 3 children between the ages of 6 and 14. They had moved into a rental house on the county road in the spring, Walter having taken a job at the processing plant 30 miles east. They were not from this county. They were not from this state, originally. Simone had a soft Gulf Coast accent that appeared when she was tired or worried, which was increasingly often. The rental house had a heating system that had been marginal in good weather and was catastrophically inadequate in actual winter. The landlord was unreachable in the way that landlords become unreachable when the problem is structural. The pipes had already frozen twice, and it was only November. Nora met the oldest Delacroix child on the school bus, a girl named B, 14, quiet and watchful in the way that Nora recognized as her own way of moving through a world that hadn't been particularly kind. They became, in the particular economy of the school bus, the kind of friends that don't require much explanation. Nora told me about the Delacroix situation on a Thursday evening while we were doing the cellar inventory. She told me matter-of-factly, the way she told me things she had already thought through and was presenting as a finished package rather than an open question. "They're cold," she said. "The heating doesn't work. Walter's trying to fix it himself because they can't afford the repair company, but he doesn't know what he's doing and he's going to make it worse before he makes it better." "What are you suggesting?" I said, though I already knew. "I'm suggesting we have a root cellar that is 52 degrees and a stove that heats the whole house." She looked at me with the level of patience of someone who has made up her mind. "And more food than we need." I thought about Meridian's letter, about the smooth way Walsh had described what they planned to do with the aquifer. Extract it, process it, distribute it at a profit. I thought about what our grandmother had written. "It has never taken more than it gave." "Call B," I said. "Tell her family to come for dinner on Sunday." The Delacroix family arrived on Sunday afternoon in Walter's truck, all 5 of them. The 3 children wide-eyed and quiet in the back seat. Simone brought a sweet potato pie that she had made, she told me, because she refused to come to someone's house empty-handed regardless of circumstances. It was the best pie I had tasted in 2 years. We ate around the kitchen table with the wood stove going, and the children thawed out, physically and in other ways, over the course of the meal. The youngest, a boy named Theo who was 6, fell asleep on the floor near the stove before dessert. Walter, a careful, proud man who did not accept help easily, was quiet for most of the meal. But afterward, when Nora took B down to see the cellar and Simone was helping with the dishes, he sat across the table from me and said, "Your grandmother built all this?" "Yes, by herself. Mostly. She hired some help for the initial digging. The rest she did herself over several years." He was quiet. He had the hands of someone who worked with them, broad, calloused, slightly scarred across the knuckles. He looked at those hands on the table for a moment. "I should know more about how things work," he said, "about how to fix things." "I didn't know any of it when we got here," I said. "I learned." He looked up. "How?" "The journal my grandmother kept. Books from the library. George at the feed store. Mostly making mistakes and then figuring out what went wrong." He nodded slowly. "I've been making plenty of mistakes with that heating system." "What kind of system is it?" he told me. I didn't know the answer, but I knew who might. I told him to bring his tools Saturday morning and we'd call Breyer, who had the kind of comprehensive mechanical knowledge that older men who have lived on rural property their whole lives accumulate like sediment. Between the 3 of us, I thought we could probably sort out a residential heating system. We sorted out the residential heating system. It took 2 Saturdays and 3 calls to Breyer and 1 call to a parts supplier 2 counties over, but we sorted it out. The Delacroix house was warm by December. Walter, for his part, spent several subsequent Saturdays helping me with a project I had been putting off for a year, reinforcing the cellar's east wall, which had developed a slow weep of moisture that needed to be addressed before it became structural. He turned out to be genuinely skilled with masonry, a trade he had learned from his own grandfather. He showed me things about reading stone and mortar that I couldn't have found in any book. "Trade," he said one Saturday, smoothing a line of new mortar into the repaired wall. That's what this place used to run on, not money, trade. It still can, I said. He looked at me sideways. You really believe that? I believe we've been warm 2 winters in a row, and the Delacroix family is warm this winter. And I have more tomatoes than I need, and you have more masonry knowledge than I have. I shrugged. That seems like a trade to me. He laughed, a real laugh, surprised out of him. The sound of it filled the cellar the way the lantern light did, warm and entirely without pretension. By the end of that second winter, something had shifted in the way Haldwell understood us. We were no longer the kids at the end of the unpaved road, the cautionary tale, the 2 teenagers who would fold when the weather got serious. We were something harder to dismiss and harder to define. We were the people with the root cellar. We were the people who had tomatoes in August that tasted the way tomatoes were supposed to taste. We were the people whose grandmother had spent 3 years building something that was still standing, still functioning, still feeding people 2 years after her death. Word travels in a small town the way water travels through limestone, slowly, finding every crack, reaching places you didn't expect it to reach. The story of the Delacroix heating system reached 4 or 5 families who had their own marginal situations, their own deferred repairs, their own winters they were approaching with inadequate preparation. Breyer started calling me when he heard about situations he thought I should know about. George at the feed store began occasionally suggesting that certain customers might want to talk to me. I was not a community organizer. I was 17 years old, nearly 18, with a guardianship arrangement and a property to maintain and a legal situation that still required periodic attention from Patricia Duval. I was not equipped to solve other people's problems, but I was equipped to show them the cellar, to let them see what 3 years of quiet, determined preparation looked like in practice, to demonstrate that the root cellar was not a relic, not a piece of rural nostalgia to be photographed and appreciated from a distance. It was a working system. It was a technology in the truest sense, a tool that extended human capacity, that made survival not just possible but comfortable, that transformed a hard winter from a threat into a season. Our grandmother had built it for 2 people. What I was beginning to understand was that it could teach something to many more. That understanding was the seed of the next thing. I didn't know yet what the next thing would look like. I knew it had something to do with the North Field and the aquifer and Helen's restaurant and Bea Delacroix's careful observation that our watercress, grown in the cold spring seep at the field's edge, was the best she had ever tasted. I knew it had something to do with what our grandmother had meant when she wrote, "It has never taken more than it gave." I was beginning to understand that she hadn't been writing about the land. She had been writing about the way of living that the land required. Attentive, reciprocal, generous within limits, never extractive, always preparing for what came next. It was not a philosophy, it was a practice, and it was learnable. 2 winters in, warm, fed, rooted, the 3rd winter was coming. We would be ready. If this story reached something in you, if you've ever had to build your own shelter from what someone else left behind, or if you've ever been the person who was told you wouldn't last the winter, I want to hear from you. Leave a comment below. Tell me about the thing you built when you had nothing. Tell me what home means to you. Because home is not given, it is made, and making it is the most human thing we do.